Hey, Inspired Tribe, my fellow freedom lovers. Happy Saturday. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's John Nolan here. Thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you for joining us. We're going to go into a subject today that is so close to our hearts, Christine's and mine's. That's part of a big, big picture and part of our vision that we've been co-creating and working on for the better part of the last 10, 15 years. So this is the next stage of it. But before we go into it, let me welcome you all in the live chat on Rumble, on YouTube. And let me say we're healthy, we're wealthy, we're whole, we're free. The mantra of the Inspired live stream. Let me also say that we're excited that our new platform, our new website is operational, theinspiredchannel.com. We are online and we're expanding there. More videos will be viewable there. It will be uncensored, unfiltered, free to watch. And we're excited for this journey. We're going completely digitally off the grid. We're going to, make it impossible for us to be shut down and not have these important conversations. Oh, I see some wonderful friends here in the live chat. Good to see you all. Okay, so yesterday we posted a video that talked about a proposal that every family, and we did talk about the United States, but this is really a worldwide movement and idea, not a new one, and not one we came up with originally too. We're going to talk about that, but we came up with, or we presented an idea that talks about a certain an allocation of land for every family to own, live on, and be independent and self-sufficient on that land. We're going to go through that idea today, but we're going to go much more in depth. We're going to look a little bit at the history, the feasibility, the core principles of this ideas and why of this idea and why we believe this should happen. And let me start by explaining. I've talked about this many times on this channel, but I think we need to drive this idea out into the public discussion. The way we live in many ways doesn't make any sense, but when you're in it and born into it, you don't really see it, right? You have to step outside of it or see something different to question the ways. And in many ways, we're not questioning certain things that we should be questioning. The biggest rat race for most people is actually not making that $1 million or $10 million or becoming a billionaire. That's not the biggest rat race for people. It's a rat race for some people. The biggest rat race for people, why they get sick, depressed, and why they become, kind of apathetic to the world at large, why they even give up on some of their morals and values is because they are constantly fighting to survive. And that, of course, is something that has been introduced to society, this fight for survival. And, aside from the natural world today, it is happening to sustain yourself, to keep that apartment or house, to make rent or mortgage payments or insurance payments. And basically, this vicious cycle keeps people from living up to their true potential in so many ways. And it is unnatural because, as I said, and I will continue to say this, we're the only species that has to pay to live in a space that belongs to us, right? Every bird has a branch. Every snake has a hole. Every animal has a place and space to live. And if for some reason that space becomes uninhabitable, that animal or that colony or that pack or that flock can move to a different place. It is not like that for us humans. We need to pay and continually pay. And it isn't just rent. It isn't just buying land. If you were at least able to just buy land and own it outright, you can't do that. That land is technically still owned by the government. How do I know that? Because they charge you yearly rent. It's a property tax, one of the most heinous taxes out there. And most taxation is outright theft, right? So because these things are in place in most places in the world, if not all of them, we find ourselves in a state of physical non-freedom. And yes, you can achieve that. Yes, you can become successful. You can build something. You can make enough money to make and keep those payments coming. But still, once you stop, and this is the crux of it, once you stop paying for the rent that you owe to the government every year, the property taxes, it will be taken away from you. So you never really own it. Yes, there are processes. I'm absolutely familiar with them, where you actually own the land, where you have a real deed to it. But we're not going to go into that today. The idea is to bring out into the open the concept that people used to live with for a very long time until it was all divvied up in properties and they became part of the commercial cycle and part of the speculation cycle. And now land is something that consistently rises in prices and becomes unaffordable for people to even dream of becoming self-sufficient. We are proposing, and it's not our proposal to begin with. That's what was laid out in the Ringing Cedars book series that we talk about so much. A wonderful book series, and this series is for everyone. By the way, everyone should read it. But the main principle that was laid out was that the human family needs to take back their land that belongs to them and have a dedicated space to live on, every family and in communities. When that happens, I believe we can really turn the page on this dark chapter and begin a completely new one. So I want to introduce a proposal that we have. It could be an amendment to the Constitution, to a state's constitution. It could be a basic template for new laws that could be created. It could be just the spark for this idea, and others take it. But it's part of a bigger picture, and that's what I want to paint with you today. So let me start with this proposal here. The amendment right to food sovereignty and homestead. And I'm going to go through it again, but we're going to go deeper than yesterday. So if you watched yesterday's video, you want to stick around, we're going to go deeper here. Every family has the inherent right to a minimum of 2 acres of land, which they shall own and have full rights to use for their residence, agricultural activities, and food production. Very, very important. Section 2, the land owned by families, as described in Section 1, shall not be subject to any form of taxation, including property tax and agricultural tax. Additionally, the food grown on this land and the labor involved in its cultivation shall not be taxed. Also very important. Section 3, families shall have the freedom to grow their own food and engage in agricultural practices on their land without undue interference or excessive regulations from the government. Why such a third section where you even talk about government regulations? It needs to be considered. The idea is not that you as a family get 2 acres of land and you put a big polluting factory on there, right? That's not the idea for this land. That's why there need to be some parameters set here. All right, let's move forward. There's a second section to this proposal. It's very important. The land owned by families, as described in Amendment 1, cannot be sold, transferred, or disposed of outside of inheritance. Why is this important? If you don't put in a provision that liberates that land from the commercial cycle, from the speculation cycle, it will just continue to go as it has been going. Land will be, given and then later sold for profit, of course, and that would defeat the whole idea. Section 2, in the event of the landowner's passing, the land shall be passed down to their immediate family members without any taxation or transfer fees. Also very important. None of what happens on, with, and around that land can and should be taxed. Section 3, the inheritance of such land as described in Section 2 shall not be subject to any form of taxation, ensuring the preservation of family-owned land for future generations. This is the whole idea. Don't sell the farm. Farmers know this. But this goes one step further, and we're going to go into the history because the United States has already had certain provisions that gave land to citizens. Is it a feasible idea? Would it work? How are the numbers? Let's look at some of the most basic numbers here. The U.S. population is roughly 331 million. If each person, and now we're not even talking about a family anymore, we're talking about each person in the U.S. would receive 2 acres, that would amount to 662 million acres, or around 27% of the available land. So that's not a lot, 27%, and that would be up only 8% from the current land usage in the United States. So you see, it is a possible idea, but we need to wrap our minds around how these things could possibly work. Let's go a little bit into the core principles, why this is important, and what the whole intention is behind it. Equal access to land. The core principle is to ensure that all families, regardless of their socioeconomic status, have equal access to land. This means that land distribution should not be based on wealth or power, but rather on the recognition of the inherent right of each family to have a plot of land to call their own. Now, I want to make a clear distinction that a lot of socialist countries have had programs like the Soviet Union where people were granted access to land even for decades, but they never owned it. That's a socialist principle. That's where the government owns everything, and it just gives, kind of those little conditional gifts to the people. That's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about socialism. We're talking about ownership, real ownership. And of course, in a spiritual sense, yes, you cannot really own the land. You're going to pass on and all. I understand that, but think about it this way. If your family actually has a dedicated land space to live on, and it can sustain itself because it doesn't have to constantly pay taxes and pay mortgages and pay all that, think about the freedom and that would create, but also the pride you would have in the beautiful creation of a family. It goes much further than just fulfilling those basic needs. It creates a cultural shift. So let's go further. What are other principles? The land distributed is intended to be of a size suitable for a single family to sustain themselves. The idea is to avoid the concentration of large tracts of land in the hands of a few individuals or corporations, promoting decentralized and small-scale farming and homesteading. The truth is that the communities that have a lot of land ownership on smaller plots where people actually live, garden, grow food, these communities where they exist and where they are not some sort of, what do they call it? A commune where people are just able to live there, but they actually own the land. That's a huge difference. Have shown huge success, both in keeping a peaceful environment, in creating schools in those developments, because there is so much shared interest. There is a huge advantage to such a way of life. Let's look further. How should that land be allocated? And these are all just suggestions. This is all just, let's put the idea out there and let's put all kinds of people on it so they can chime in. And you have chimed in the comments. I've read some great comments yesterday. So we can all chime in and develop this further. The distribution of land could be organized either by the government or through local communities. In the government-led approach, land may be allocated based on specific policies and criteria, while the community-led approach might involve collective decision-making processes. I think, generally speaking, we would have to look at the current ownership of land, right? There's federal land, there's state-owned land, there's county-owned land. There are certain states, for example, in the United States, that are already giving out incentives to people to move there because only for economic reasons. We're gonna show by really highlighting this whole idea that this would be a solution for the sick care system. It would bring much more health back. It would really bring an uptick to the economy and would actually heal our current economic system. There's so much in this that would happen with the implementation, and where they have implemented it, we already see some of these successes. Okay, regenerative land use. The recipients of the distributed land are encouraged to use it in a regenerative and responsible manner, right? This is also important. It involves practices such as organic farming, permaculture, and other eco-friendly methods that respect and nurture the natural environment. You all know we're great friends and partners with Jim Gale and his family at Food Forest Abundance, and they are one of the premier distributors today and planners of food forests, permaculture food forests, where they help people create a way of garden, or a kind of garden or food forest that mimics the way nature does it, and hence does not produce a lot of labor-intense environments. The idea is that we really connect and learn from nature how to do it, because currently a lot of people shy away from farming and gardening because over the past 100 and 150 years, this industrial agriculture has been, we've been brainwashed with the idea that we plant single crop lines and then we have to use fertilizers and pesticides, which is, it's insane, but that's all we saw. So now we're learning that there are actually methods where we can create an environment on our land that takes care of itself for the most part. Spiritual connection with the land. This goes hand in hand, right? An essential aspect of the land distribution idea is the acknowledgement of the spiritual connection between humans and nature and the need to respect and care for the land, recognizing it as a living entity with its own needs and consciousness. This is slowly beginning to sink in with people. The point is also, when you live on the land that you own, you begin having a more intense connection with it. There's something about knowing this is your space that for most people allows them to treat it differently and to feel differently. That's why they say, when I'm at home, when I'm in my own backyard, or when I'm in my own field, or when I'm in my own garden, I feel so much more connected. It's like the plants are talking to me, right? Christine has this spring once again created a magnificent little oasis that when we are with the plants and when we are with the garden, there is a little ecosystem there. And that is a spiritual experience, is where we calm down or have beautiful ideas, conversations, quiet time. This is what begins to happen when people return to nature. Self-sufficiency and independence, of course, is a main point. That's one of the main reasons. Humanity is currently dependent on systems outside of their control. When the grocery stores close, panic, right? When when you open the faucet and no water comes out, panic. When the power goes off, panic, because we are not in control of any of these systems. By providing families with their own plot of land, the land distribution idea aims to foster self-sufficiency and independence. Families are encouraged to grow their own food, build their shelter, and meet their basic needs through their labor and connection with nature. And this is so important that we begin thinking about, what is the greatest gift we can give to our children? Is it just a trust fund? Is it a college degree? Is it a cruise ship vacation? Or is it a dedicated space where they can live, create their own space, and raise their children? We need to think about that. What kind of freedom might that be? And knowing they can't sell that, so that is out of the equation, that they just make a quick buck. So when they can't sell it, they will start living with and on it, because it will become their home. Community building, right? While each family is given its own plot of land, one of the main intentions is the formation of intentional communities. These communities allow individuals to come together, share knowledge, resources, and support each other in the pursuit of a more sustainable and spiritually enriched lifestyle. Think about it. If you have a community where everybody is at least on the same page with self-sufficiency, health, growing their own food, growing their own medicine, you will have one family that is really, really good at cultivating certain herbs and they really know much about it. The other family is really good at preserving certain seeds and improving them year after year. You will have all these enriching factors. You will have people that are inspired to teach children. All these things begin happening in communities. Okay, let's go a little bit into the history, because this is not a new idea to give land. There was actually in the United States something, there were multiple Homestead Acts. Let's go a little bit about what they were. The Homestead Acts were several laws in the United States by which an applicant could acquire ownership of government land or the public domain, typically called a homestead. In all, more than 160 million acres, or nearly 10% of the total area of the United States, was given away free to 1.6 million homesteaders. Most of the homesteads were west of the Mississippi River. Now, we can, of course, and we have to always discuss that this land wasn't really freely available to give away. It was stolen. We know this. But here we are in 2023, and we have to find a way forward that would, of course, include the indigenous people as well. But we have to find a way forward for the people that are here now in order also to heal those old wounds, right? The Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976 ended homesteading. Think about this. This lasted till 1976. By that time, federal government policy had shifted to retaining control of Western public lands. The only exception to this new policy was in Alaska, for which the law allowed homesteading until 1986. So this is not an idea that is new. It's been around. We just have to revive it, and revive it now this time around. Not just for economic reasons, not just to populate areas, but to actually create these paradise gardens on earth that will produce so much health, joy, and happiness and abundance for everybody involved. It's a whole new spiritual evolutionary process that we've gone through to understand it from a different aspect now. This currently exists in certain parts of Russia. The law on the Far Eastern hectare is a law by Russian President Vladimir Putin to give 1 hectare of free land in the Russian Far East to Russian citizens and foreign nationals as long as they live there for 5 years. The plan allows only Russian citizens to own the land. Foreigners can join the program but cannot own the land until 5 years after they have immigrated to Russia, which I think is pretty, generous. As of December 2017, more than 107,000 people have applied and 40,000 people have become owners of the land. So this already exists, right? And Russia, of course, has a much greater landmass compared to population. But as I pointed out earlier, think about this. If each person in the United States, each person, each baby, toddler, each person in prison, and every 89-year-old grandfather and grandmother, each person would get 2 acres, we would still be at 27% of the land usage that's available. So it's feasible, it's possible, it's doable. These are just some of the bullet points that we're discussing here, and I wanted to show this to you, that there's a lot of thought that goes into this. And actually, as a matter of fact, this morning, I was inspired to register 2 domains, which are going to, in some way, shape, or form, talk about this idea and bring it forward. It's, I believe, 2acresforfree.com and birthrightland.com. Just because I believe we need to get the ball rolling on this. What would be the easiest way to get this started? The easiest way to get this started is to look for pilot regions. Again, talking about the United States, which would be states that are sparsely inhabited, states that are already looking. I think West Virginia is looking. I know Vermont, I think, is looking. There's certain states in the United States that are looking to bring people in. I think in the Midwest, there's a few states that are already incentivizing people to move there by giving them cash money or by giving them very cheap loans and stuff like that. Here's what we project would happen, and what also the books project would happen. And in certain instances, it has already happened, because the people have not waited in Russia, for example, where these books were written and published starting in the mid-90s. They didn't wait for the laws to kick in. They worked, they saved, and they started buying up land, liberating it, and growing food, creating their space of love, creating their homesteads, creating their communities. And one of the things that has immediately kicked in was a greater sense of well-being and health, as it would naturally. And people say, well, if you don't tax the labor, the products that are the produce and the fruits and everything, and if you don't tax the land, well, how are you going to pay for infrastructure? We have been told so many lies that we need to deprogram from. Number one, we have a completely out of control, bloated apparatus right now that requires the constant increase in some taxes to keep it going. But we could reduce incrementally, and with a strategic plan, we could reduce the size of the government by 90% over a period of 10 years, I believe. We could reduce it and not lose any of the services. And I'll give you a very simple example that you would say this doesn't pass the sniff test, but actually it's interesting. And again, I'm not a Musk fan by any stretch of the imagination, but what did Elon Musk do at Twitter? He fired 90% of the staff, and the app is running better than ever. How? Because there is a socialist mindset in government which keeps increasing its size and keeps making it bigger and bigger and bigger. And it doesn't have to be that way. If you become efficient, if you weed out the corruption, if you weed out all the unnecessary programs, you can bring this down by a lot, and the necessity for all these taxes is gone as well. But we need to start somewhere. So the suggestion here is save this video. We're gonna find a way to put this in writing on some sort of website. It's going to be very simple because one more project isn't currently on the agenda really time-wise, but we'll make it happen somehow in the next period of time, where you could at least see the bullet points and open it up for commentary, but also think about the people in local governments right now. Think about the people in remote areas where land is available, but people are not moving there. Think about all the possibilities where we could begin with these ideas, implementing them, and we have to retain the core principles. This has to be free to own, not free to use. It's one core principle. One of the big principles is it cannot be sold. If once that happens, it's over, because you're only going to get speculation. We can work out the processes of inheritance if someone doesn't have children, or it could go back to the land trust. It could go. I mean, there are certain ways we could work that out with. But the main idea is that we get the ball in this discussion rolling. Start talking about it at the dinner table. Start talking about it at city council meetings or with certain individuals. We need to get this idea out there, and by talking about it, new ideas come in. I would encourage everyone to read the Ringing Cedars books, because you really get a comprehensive view of the whys, the history, and why this is so important, why this is the crux of it all, and why it basically puts us back in a state where we actually are custodians of the land that we were born on or that we live on, and where we actually have a stake in it, which will make us much, much better human beings, and it will make us much healthier, wealthier, and more joyful. This is a vision that we will continue to carry on until it comes to fruition. We also believe it would be the end of the current control system and enslavement system, because when you can take care of yourself and your own, you will never, ever sacrifice your values and principles, go along with some bullshit agenda mandates, because there's no necessity. People have only done that in the past because there was necessity. So you remove that necessity by becoming self-sufficient and self-reliant. Now, should we wait for those laws to be passed? No. I think we should do what we can with what we have right now, but simultaneously build this new way of thinking, because it is a way of thinking. It would seem, you could bring a lot of kind of red-blooded American capitalists out here and say, this is stupid, this is crazy, but it actually isn't. You can still have a free market capitalist system without the abuse of land for speculation. Think about this. We could still have a wonderful free market system and take the land out of that speculative process. Now, it would upset a lot of people, but think about how many people it would liberate. Think about how many families it would give back their inherent birthright, a space to live on. Think about how much happiness and healing that would bring to the families. Think about the communities that were created and the pressure it would take off of people, because no rent payment is due and no mortgage payment is due, and finally some real sense, real life practical freedom would come back to the equation. So I think this is something we can all do. This is something we can all talk about. This is something we can carry out into the world. And you can point now to the history and say, this is not the first time this has been suggested. This has happened in the United States. It's how the United States were populated. And you could argue it was the foundation for a lot of the economic success of the United States. So because this seems to be also an inherent American idea, it shouldn't be that hard to bring it back, but bring it back in the right way. Bring it back in the right way. So I encourage you all, use this live stream, put comments down there, have, for suggestions. That way we can go through them later on, start implementing those ideas, discussing them further, and bring this out in the open. All right. This was it. Thank you so much for tuning in. There's all kinds of links in the video description where you can find the shorter version of this video, our locals community, if you would like to come to our uncensored coffee and truth live streams and honey talks. Yes. And I'm going to have to add that link because I didn't put it there. But we also have a upcoming retreat and a few slots left for that retreat, the YATO retreat, the You Are the One retreat that's happening in October in Cape San Blas, Florida. And this is 4 days that we spend with a small group of people. We go very deep, intense. It's basically absolutely intensifying the human organic timeline, where it's all about connecting with that deepest part of you and the creator, where it's overcoming, realizing where your boundaries, where your comfort zones are, what's holding you back, overcoming that, releasing that, and really getting in touch with that deepest, highest part of you. And I'll actually, I'll share the link here. Let me just quickly find it here. And if you feel inspired to join us, there's really only 2 conditions we have for that. And they're quite simple to fulfill. The first condition is that you have to feel a very, very strong yes, because we want to go all the way. Here's the link in the live chat. A very strong yes, an intuitive yes. That's what we always say. If you feel it deep in your spirit, this is for me, please join us. The second condition is you cannot be taking any mind-altering medication, legal or illegal, antidepressants. It's not because we judge you for that, but because the processes, the meditations, the breath work, and the deep practices that we do there together do not work with that kind of medication. All righty. Much love to you all. Would love to have you. It's a wonderful place down in Florida on the Forgotten Coast. And just check it out and see if this speaks to you. Many blessings. We love you. We appreciate you. We'll be back with you again very, very soon.